future that I'd love to see and I hope to see, I think it's really the only future. I think it's in about 50 years. I think the time is around 2070. I think because in the next 50 years, we really have to, we'll either be gone or we won't. And my hope and prayer and assumption is that we will be here, or we will have learned how to work cooperatively rather than competitively, not only with each other, but with nature. I think for too long, we've seen nature as something to be conquered, as something to be controlled, rather than something to be sort of celebrated and cherished. And again, cooperation with it, understanding our integral tie to all creatures and all kind of everything that's there. I think this can only happen with some sort of global governance. You know, we have communication technologies that have linked us together, but they have not done so in a way that is equitable, that is, you know, again, this notion of cooperation, many hands make light work, and many viewpoints make for a far more interesting society, and a far more, you know, one that I would certainly rather live in, that appreciates and values difference rather than trying to stomp it out and make everything the same. And obviously, there will be hiccups. You can't really have global governance without having occasionally some of the constituents feeling like they're being taken advantage of or oppressed or that kind of thing. But I think that there should be checks in place to anticipate those. And you know, certainly, I think that the nationalism that we've seen in the world, in the UK and the United States, you know, most importantly, given the nature of the superpowers that we used to be and potentially still are, I think that that sort of nationalism has no place in a globally connected world. And so we're really going to have to figure that out, how there can be, you know, respect for the kind of the sovereignty of different locales, but still this understanding that you're part of a global citizenship and a network. So that really is going to have to be taken seriously. And it's not that big a stretch, I don't think. I think we're going to have to work together. You know, the only way that we're going to conquer these problems, like energy dependence on fossil fuels, the only way we're going to get out of that, the only way we're going to get all the plastic out of the ocean, is to work together and to direct all of our innovation and technological prowess toward the solving of human misery, honestly. And one of the ways you solve human misery is to respect the planet. I think if we can just make our way to some more less economic disparity, that has to be a case. And it's interesting because I feel like lately the natural catastrophes and disasters, it's funny, I was listening to a news report and it's like, they're actually hitting the wealthy now as much as they're hitting, you know, the poor. I mean, the fact is, the more things you acquire and the more kind of material things you have in a world where climate change is pretty rampant, the more things you have to lose. So I think in terms of evening things out, that may happen, but I think we also need laws that are intended to even things out.
On the kind of follow-up, looking more at your work, which we're going to get into in detail in a second. But when it comes to communications, you know, kind of looking at that future, like how do you see, what role do you see communications or some of the work that you're doing in kind of helping to get there or being part of the process?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, you know, we think of technology as something that's kind of damaging to the earth, and so far it certainly has been. You know, with the cobalt, all the minerals that we're taking out of the ground and putting in. But that said, I think I think institutionally, we need to have a couple of things. And number one is we need to recognize and hone our spirituality as much as our physical well-being, but also our physical well-being. I think we don't know enough about how our bodies work. We haven't trained our children or our adults. So I think communication technologies right now have not really been all that liberatory, but they have the potential, because here's why. We can capture older ways of knowing, oral traditions, all of the wisdom that we've lost and we've forgotten in our rush to create digital technologies. That still exists in the world. And right now we have, look at what we're doing right here. We're capturing oral culture by capturing video, but we also have writing. So this is the moment where we bring all the best of oral culture together with all we've learned from literate culture, and we can capture that digitally. So for instance, that would cause us to think about social media far differently. Social media then would be something that you do to add to value, not your own value, but to the world's value. So it's less about the navel gazing and capturing all your freaking meals. And it's far more about how can I contribute to a set of knowledge? How can I contribute, and how can I learn from someone across the globe? And how can I then contribute? So that, I think, is a more healthy linkage for people in a globally connected. It's not just this sort of mirror that we want to make ourselves look good. And then the second thing we have to do is really, really focus on literacy. A literacy that has, again, it's media literacy, but it's also, what does a word do? What does an image do? How can we put these things together? And my feeling has always been that advanced literacy must include not only consuming media, but producing it as well, because you just cannot understand the rhetorical choices made in an artifact of media until you're forced to make those yourself. You don't understand the rhetorical choices. But if we have a good strong literacy that can help citizens contribute to public debate, and that can help them not get duped by institutions that don't have their best interests in mind, that they can see through, and they don't accept the soundbite world, and they don't accept that someone named Trump can tweet something and that can change economic markets. If we had more literacy around that and recognize that this person is just, consciously sowing confusion, then I think we have a possibility to really make some difference. And you might think, oh, communications, that's the least of our problems, right? We have to quit cutting down the rainforest and stuff, but it's the only way.
It's the only way that happens.
Yeah. I mean,
how we connect to each other.
Yeah, when you live in a culture that is so dependent on semiotics, on communication, it's not only an opportunity to make an impact, because it's very vulnerable. These institutions that are trying to just confuse and keep the citizenry distracted can actually be turned on their head, and that can be, if we really put the power of social media or just networked communications to work for the good of everyone, we could actually make some changes. Amazing. But that only happens if we have an educated citizenry.
Yep. If you can just speak in simple everyday language here on a little bit on what you do and your perspective and what you're working on. We'll kind of give a little context.
This is great. What I do is basically my work has always focused on how knowledge is produced. I mean, in its really basic terms, it's like, what is the production of knowledge? How do we know what we think we know? How do we believe these things? But what I'm working on is honing my sense of lettered orality, which sounds like I know it sounds like a contradiction. But I had a friend and mentor named Gregory Ulmer always said to me, because for a long time, I still am the associate director of the Institute for Multimedia Literacy. And that's an institution at USC where I'm faculty that has been around since 1998 with the goal of teaching students how to write with the language of images the way that they write with words. So a friend of mine and this mentor had said to me, multimedia literacy is kind of a ridiculous word, term. It's like saying lettered orality, because the notion is we were an oral culture, then we moved to a print literate culture, and now we're in something else. So I always thought, oh yeah, right, lettered orality, that makes no sense. And I'm embracing the notion of lettered orality because, well, first of all, I should just say that the belief of many, and my belief is that humankind used to be in an oral culture. Then with the invention of writing and then all of the technologies to write, we went into a period of literate culture, and now we're in something else. So it's digital culture. It retains some of the elements of oral culture and some of those of literate culture, but it's more. And figuring out what that is has been the goal of many, many scholars. Some call it electracy, cybercy, media literacy. I think lettered orality actually is a fitting term because we're never going to forget the fact that we write and we know what, once you had writing, you could externalize your thought. You could write something down and have it there. It could be, so that allowed you to think different thoughts. Yeah, right. And it allowed you to keep it and transmit knowledge. In ways that we could only do orally through, that's why there was a lot of repetition in oral culture because it had to be mnemonically, you had to recall it. Once you have writing, you can, use your mind for other things because you can have this artifact that is an externalization of thought. Well, now we're in this period where we can capture oral culture as well, and we can add literate culture. So this is a perfect example, this Skype interview that we're doing. I was at a workshop in New Mexico in July on curandissimo, which is Mexican folk healing. And so they brought people in for all over like South and Central America. And these are people that live like next to pyramids and 80-year-old women who they have this brilliant knowledge of plants and nature, and that is threatened to be lost. But here it is, and we're filming it, so we can videotape it. So we've got the videotape of these women. We can keep that oral knowledge, and then we can add to it, writing, and we can. So it's kind of the best of all worlds. These tools in which we can have an image, a sound, and a word together. And I think we can make the best of kind of scientific discovery, but pair that with ancient knowledge and wisdom that we've lost. And so we have this opportunity to bring it all together and to, share it.
And the two projects, if there's something else you want to talk about, we can discuss that too. But the two thoughts and projects that kind of come to mind for me that I remember is kind of how do we you were working on like a library of some sort or a way of like I'm going to struggle to articulate
like a video
it.
archive.
Yes, but an archive that could essentially read, right, archive and document that. You know what? I'm just going to have you explain it because I'm struggling.
Yeah, I have a video analysis tableau project, the best. So the notion behind this project is that there is more video generated. The statistics are insane. I mean, it used to be there's more generated in one day than a human being could watch in 20 years, or I think it's maybe an hour. I know that Cisco had a huge report a few years ago, and they said by 2020, 85% of internet messages would be consumer video. Wow. So yeah, we're getting to be a video heavy culture. So my video analysis Tableau project is centered on how do we use computers and how do we train them to see the way that humans see? Because in some ways, computers see more than we do. In some ways, they see a lot less. So human vision adds context and adds meaning to images, but with that meaning, we often block out certain things. So computers, by contrast, they don't get tricked by the narrative. They see only what's on the screen. So what my team and I are trying to do is bring those two together. The reason is because you can't view it all. So scholars, researchers, don't have access to studying this really vital area of culture.
Right.
Because there's no way. Once upon a time, you could be, say, a film scholar and have expertise in a certain area because you would have seen the whole corpus. Right. But there's just no way that anyone has knowledge of the whole corpus. So how do we analyze it or even know the impact on human beings until we're able to study it?
Then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, because it is incredibly relevant, especially for all of this idea of, for the channel living in an age of disruptive change and improving our skills at redoing, right? Understanding how to, re-understanding, reimagining, and rebuilding, and getting used to being in that cycle consistently. And so a lot of your work in the media world, it talks about remixing, right? And and looking at that story. So I think in many ways it's doing all three of those things. But I would love you to speak a little bit to this idea of remixing and some of the problems, some of the challenges that are coming up, especially when it comes to ownership, original ideas, and kind of bureaucracy as far as, where the red tape is and kind of,
Yeah, our institutions really haven't. Well, first of all, I think in the United States anyway, and Europe is getting this now too. In the UK, there's a notion, they have doctrines of fair dealing, it's called. But I'm not as conversant with all of the regulations as well as in the United States. And they're germane because we're kind of forcing them on other people as well. So in the United States, copyright law, which was meant to protect, the little guy and protect ownership, it never anticipated the digital. It really needs to be rethought and amended. So when I say it didn't anticipate the digital, what I mean is that if I have a book and I lend my book to you, I no longer have a book. If I have a digital book and I lend you my book, I don't exhaust the original. So I still have the original. And so copyright law doesn't know how to deal with that. It hasn't allowed for this kind of endless replication without exhausting the original. So all we have until copyright law is amended, which it needs to be, we have the doctrine of fair use. Good doctrine, fair use, because it requires thinking through. It doesn't make hard and fast rules, because it requires thoughtful consideration about how you're using a piece of media, which is a good thing, but in theory, it's a great thing. In practice, it's not as good, because what that means is to figure out a fair use claim requires litigation. And obviously, big media companies have no problem with litigation. They have attorneys on staff, whereas the little person, the individual, does not. So for many years, there has been this sort of pressure and almost bullying of individuals to not use media, which has resulted in kind of illiteracy. It really hurts media literacy because you have faculty who don't know. They either comply with copyright to the point where they don't even touch a piece of media, or they just go, it's, all bets are off, and they just overuse it. Things that I teach is fair use. How do we make sure that every source we're using is used fairly, just like when you cite words? So I have, I make students rehearse their fair use argument. So for instance, I am using this image from a film to make it an object of analysis and to say, look, this is what our people are watching, and this is what's prevalent. There's women being screamed at in 15 films, or you know what I mean? So
Right.
it's more to comment on it. So that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks, is really just the pressure of the media conglomerates on individuals to be passive and not to use their media. That's harmful and damaging.
Yeah, definitely.
Because essentially it means Hollywood says
It's deciding.
who may speak.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
Deciding
And who's
stories.
silent.
So you consume them. They are what they are. They stay what they are. You don't break them apart and decide which pieces you're going to keep. And
and we know the linkage between what we see, visual media, and identity formation. And so, when you don't see yourself reflected on screen, or you see yourself reflected poorly, that's the self-image you get.
Yeah. Planting some nice seeds.
Right. Yeah.
So cool. So the other, when it comes to this remixing and getting back up to your future story, when we talk about cooperation and globalization, one of the first things that came to mind for me was actually communication, which we talked about, but but really speaking to language barriers, of course, right? Language barriers and in a globalized world, or as we're struggling, we're having identity crisis left and right now, right? Yeah. Because we're kind of which culture is gonna dominate, and how are we talking to each other? And we have obviously huge language barriers. There's plenty of translators, but not for everyday people, right? We're still in the world of our language. So I'd just be curious, kind of your thoughts on multimedia literacy and how it can help, it can help bridge and possibly have a much larger role in the future of communications as far as breaking down those boundaries.
Yeah. Well, it is, that is tricky because we're stuck in language. We only have verbal language to communicate with. And obviously there's many different languages, but I think there's two things about that. Number one, I do think that translation, that's one use of computers that I think is for the good. It's really been, there've been many programs like Duolingo that are not only teaching people another language, but it's helping translate the web into different languages. So, but the other thing though is that what this concept of lettered orality means for me is that we understand that these visual media and sonic media also tap into the affective, the things that we don't have words for, that we don't have language for, and they're still vitally important. So by emphasizing that, that's a place where we can join other people, and the language isn't a barrier. So really, really understanding how the affective works can help us make visual media more of a language that can be shared widely.
I love that. Curiosity. We had some, just your perspective, nature versus nurture. Which one is more powerful?
I think both are very powerful. And, I think really I think the either or question can be a problem, because it's led us to, because if we think it's all nature, that everyone's gene splicing and stuff, and I don't know that that's the way to go. And yet I firmly believe in nurture, because I have a sister who is the most genetically similar person to me, right? One would think. And she's so different from me, and very tragic. Very in horrible shape and very ill. And I think if you have a propensity for kind of certain types of mental illness, they have to be actuated. So it is nature, it's your genes, but then if some trauma doesn't kind of strike you young, then you may escape what those genes have in mind for you. The field of epigenetics has really shown us that genes can express in different ways depending on their environment. So, gosh, gosh, what if we honed our children's spirituality, not their religion? You know, what would that mean? Wouldn't that be something
Yeah.
like, yeah, we could actually, those genes could express in wonderful ways, you know?
Just personal preference, destiny versus choice.
Oh
I
gosh.
know.
Oh boy. I think again, I think it's both. I mean, I think yeah, I don't want to discount the role of destiny. I think it's there, but I think you can either squander your destiny or not. So I think there is a choice to follow your destiny and I think I guess there are times that I can tell, and I never would have thought this when I was younger. I think the great gift of age for me has been that uh, you've seen some stuff and you know you can pretty much get through most things. But I think that for me, the most fulfilling moments in my life and the ones that are most productive from, you know, an outside point of view are when I'm going with my destiny. You know, when I'm
Yeah.
in the wave of life and not fighting against it. So I think, yeah, both.
Yeah. I agree with you, though. I tend to say the thing. I feel like certain things are hardwired, and I've tried to fight against them, and I'm like, I don't know. It's just in my wiring. But
Yeah.
then there's a way that I can use it to accelerate, right? Like it's kind of like
Yeah.
activating my hardwiring for
Yes.
this, to really capitalizing on my potential, or I can ignore it, go against it, not make the choices, and take care of myself in the way that I need to, and then destined, right? Then it's choice.
Yeah.
Exactly like you said, you can squander whatever it is, but
Yeah.
you definitely feel some of that hardwiring sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because, yeah, you know, I have the shaman I care a lot about, and she was
Yeah.
saying, you know, you need to look at yourself the way you are, not the person you want to be, not the person you think you be. You got to have the person you want to be, but unless you see who you are, you'll have the wrong map for how to get
Mm,
there.
mm,
So, yeah, so I know for me, again, my outside has always been fearless and I have my guns and everything, but I realized, no, I'm not. I'm actually more vulnerable than that, and I'm actually softer than that.
yeah.
And you know, so that's kind of revelatory, but you know, it's necessary information if I'm going to go further, you know, because
Hmm.
if I just assume I don't have to worry about that, then I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to get in trouble at every time, or, you know, I'm going to have, my actions won't play out the way that I want them to because I'll have the wrong information.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So that
Uh,
was, and that really stuck with me this weekend.
yeah. Yeah. Just a brief question for you personally. It could just be in your personal life when you're looking at change. Where do you think where does it begin for you? Is it a thought, an action? Where does it start?
Yeah, I think it always starts, I think it always starts mentally for me. Like it's always a thought. And I think it's usually when I wake up in the morning. That's my biggest gauge for how my life is going. You know, how do I feel when I wake up? You know,
Mm,
um, when I'm in the wrong spot, when I remember when I need to have change, it'll be very clear to me in those moments and maybe that's the time that you look directly at yourself and you don't see any facade and you don't see anything else. But I think I always have a sense that there's something's not working or something's wrong, and that's where I think change actuates in me. Because I don't think I am someone who just changes to change. I'm not afraid
right.
of change at all, but I'm not chasing it in any case. But so I always have to feel it first, and then I have to act on it. And when I don't act on it, or when I stomp those feelings down, push them back, ignore them, think, oh, I can make the situation better, or, you know, then I get physically sick.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah,
As,
the link between my head and my physical well-being has never been more clear to me.
mm,
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah. That mind versus matter. Yeah. So it sounds like it's almost for you, change starts, which, may seem, but I mean, it's an essential step. Change starts with recognition.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah,
Which
recognition, acknowledgement.
acknowledgement, which is paying attention and listening
Yeah.
when something is off. I love
Hmm.
that because I think we so often, and what I hear, when I've done this, talked to people a few times, we go straight to the act of changing, right?
Mm,
So it's like,
yeah.
okay, how am I going to start manifesting or actualizing the change? But I think we don't spend enough time with the acknowledgement of what
Yeah.
change is necessary. Um, that's again this whole channel and everything that I'm doing. That's what it's all about
Yeah.
is recognizing and acknowledging and having this starting conversation.
And I think that's where, I think the revolutionaries like of the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the problem lay. Like they were very good at calling attention to everything that was wrong, but no one was looking inside.
Mm.
I don't feel as though there was any sense of, I mean, I don't want to say culpability, but of needing to change yourself as well, or your way
Right.
of thinking. It was
Right.
always like very reactive to these situations and
Yeah.
not, and so maybe when you try and do good with that without looking at your own self-actualization, it's less potent, I think, or it's
Mm.
has less staying power anyway.
Yeah.
I have one. I have a mantra. And it's been very, very important and powerful to me for, I don't know, am I 58? Like 35 years. So it's something my stepfather used to say a lot, and it's a quote from it's actually Galahad says it in Don Quixote, but it's mine is the strength of 10 because my heart is pure.
Mm.
And I think of that. I mean, I think he shaped my ethic in my life because, I mean, I used to kind of poke fun at him for saying it because sometimes it would be when he, had a few cocktails, but I took it to heart. And when I was on an arts program in high school, and I even painted that with calligraphy for him. I made him a sign that said, "Mine is the strength of 10 because my heart is pure." And it wasn't until he died that I realized, I always think the one thing no one can take away from you is your integrity. They can take, everything else away. And when he died, I really started wondering if my huge sense of integrity comes from that. I've just always practiced, or I've always thought of that phrase. And how do I make sure that my heart is pure before I kind of confront anything else in the world? So mine is the strength of 10 because my heart is pure.
Sure. Oh, I love
I think
it.
they're words to live by.
Yeah, I think so.